She was dismissed the moment she walked in because she carried a canvas tote, wore no jewelry, and had the nerve to sit among a sea of Hermès, Chanel, and Prada. They called her a bored housewife. They hinted her son didn't belong in the same classroom as elite blood. They mocked her, ignored her, treated her like background noise in a boardroom worth hundreds of thousands a year. Until the principal pointed at her and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the chair of the State Education Council." The auditorium at Wellington Grove Private Elementary in Massachusetts turned to ice, the weight of those words sinking into the polished mahogany tables like a guillotine's blade. The March Parent Council meeting was no mere formality. It was a high-stakes arena where the elite parents, whose children carried $2,000 backpacks and whose lunchboxes were curated like art, vied for control over the school's future. With annual tuition exceeding $45,000, Wellington Grove was a fortress of privilege, its marble-floored auditorium aglow with a chandelier that cast a sterile light over the gathered power players. The agenda, governance reform, and scholarship fund strategy was a polite mask for their real aim to keep the school an exclusive enclave, untouched by those they deemed beneath them. Whispers of a secret state. Education Council representatives sent to evaluate the school's eligibility for state funding hung in the air like a storm cloud, but no one knew who it was. The parents scanned the room, their eyes lingering on tailored suits and leather briefcases, never suspecting the woman in the back, her presence as unassuming as a shadow. Harper Ellis sat in the last row, her faded denim shirt and khaki pants, a stark contrast to the sea of silk blouses, cashmere sweaters, and designer dresses. Her worn canvas shoes rested quietly on the floor, scuffed but clean. Her plain tote bag tucked beside her chair, its simplicity, a silent defiance against the room's opulence. In her lap, a small notebook lay open, its pages filling with precise, elegant handwriting, her pen moving with the steady rhythm of a metronome. Her low ponytail tied with a simple black band brushed her shoulder, a few strands catching the chandelier's light, and her face, free of makeup, was calm but sharp, her hazel eyes scanning the room like a cartographer mapping a battlefield. Her son, Ethan, a 9-year-old fourth grader in Class 4A, was a top student. His report cards a cascade of A's, his essays pinned on classroom walls, but he was an outcast. His plain lunchbox and second-hand backpack, targets for cruel whispers of scholarship, kid, and charity case. Harper's presence was an anomaly, her silence a fortress, as the parents postured, their voices dripping with entitlement, their Rolexes and diamond earrings glinting like armor. She wrote in her notebook, each stroke a record of the room's dynamics, while the elite dismissed her as irrelevant, a nobody who'd wandered into their gilded world. The chandelier's light glinted off her only adornment, a thin silver ring on her left hand, its understated elegance a subtle hint of a life they couldn't imagine, a life they were too arrogant to question. The meeting began with a hum of self-important chatter, the parents' wealth on display, as they debated scholarship quotas with the casual arrogance of those who'd never known want, their manicured hands gesturing with the confidence of untouchable power. Kendall Wexley, her Hermès Birkin bag, a gleaming centerpiece on the table, spoke first, her voice carrying across the auditorium like a siren's call. "We're here to discuss scholarship funding. But let's be honest, we need to protect our community standards," she said, her eyes flicking to Harper, a predatory glint in her gaze. "Some students and their parents don't embody the Wellington spirit." The room tittered heads, turning to follow her gaze, their smiles sharp and knowing. Richard Hale, a car dealership mogul with a Rolex that screamed, new money, smirked, his voice booming across the tables. "I don't pay $45,000 a year for my kid to sit next to someone who packs lunch in a Ziploc bag," he said, his words landing like a slap. The laughter was sharp, a blade slicing through the air, cutting deeper as eyes settled on Harper's canvas tote. Vanessa, Crane, her Chanel suit, pristine, leaned forward with a half-smile, her tone syrupy but venomous. "I just think stay-at-home moms should leave policy decisions to parents who actually contribute something real," she said, her words a deliberate dart aimed at Harper's heart. Harper didn't flinch, her pen moving steadily across her notebook, her face serene, her hazel eyes steady as a lighthouse in a storm. The insults landed, but she absorbed them, her silence, a mirror reflecting their pettiness, her composure, a rebuke to their cruelty. As Harper sat in the back, a fourth-grade teacher, Ms. Langley, addressed the room during a discussion on curriculum standards, her voice sharp and pointed, her posture rigid with self-righteous authority. "We strive for excellence, but some parents don't grasp the academic rigor here," she said, her eyes locking onto Harper with a mix of pity and disdain. "I've seen mothers who can't even help with basic homework. Imagine their kids dragging down our averages." The parents chuckled, their gazes turning to Harper's denim shirt and canvas tote, their amusement a chorus of agreement. "It's unfair to our gifted students." Ms. Langley continued, her tone dripping with condescension. "They deserve parents who match their potential." Harper's pen moved steadily, her hazel eyes unyielding, but the teacher's words were a public shaming implying Ethan's success was, despite her, a stain on her motherhood. A mother nearby whispered loud enough for all to hear, "She probably doesn't even know algebra." The laughter was a whip cracking through the auditorium, each chuckle a lash against Harper's dignity. Harper's silver ring glinted a quiet anchor amidst the storm, but Ms. Langley's attack was a professional condemnation meant to erase her credibility before the elite. Her silence held a fortress against the onslaught, but the teacher's scorn burned a wound that seared the audience's hearts, igniting their fury at the injustice. The room's cruelty escalated as the discussion turned to scholarships, each parent eager to outdo the others in their disdain their voices, a symphony of classism conducted under the chandelier's unforgiving light. Lila Monroe, a tech heiress with Prada sunglasses perched on her head, like a crown, spoke up, her voice dripping with entitlement. "If we're funding scholarships, let's ensure the recipients fit our culture," she said, her eyes narrowing as they flicked toward Harper. "I saw one kid with a second-hand backpack. My daughter shouldn't share a classroom with that." Her friends nodded, their diamond earrings glinting like daggers in the light. Richard leaned forward, his smirk widening his Rolex, catching the chandelier's glow. "Exactly. We're building legacies, not running a soup kitchen," he said, his voice a bellow that echoed off the marble walls. The laughter grew louder, a chorus of agreement that reverberated through the auditorium. James Thornton, a father in a bespoke suit, chuckled, pointing at Harper's notebook with a mocking grin. What's she writing? Her grocery list. The room erupted the mockery, a public sport, the parents' amusement, a living thing that fed on Harper's stillness. Harper's pen paused, her eyes lifting briefly, catching Lila's smirk, her hazel gaze a quiet storm brewing beneath her calm exterior. She wrote another line, her handwriting precise, but her silence drew more scorn, the room's elite emboldened by her lack of response. A mother in a Gucci dress, Claire Dutton added, her voice dripping with faux pity. Maybe she's planning her son's next thrift store outfit. The laughter was relentless, a tidal wave that crashed over Harper, each word painting her as less her canvas tote and worn shoes, a canvas for their cruelty, their superiority unchallenged as they dismantled her presence. During a pause in the funding discussion, a school board member, Mr. Carver, stood, his tailored suit exuding authority, his silver hair gleaming under the chandelier. "Let's not forget our image," he said, his voice booming across the auditorium, commanding attention. "We're a beacon of prestige, but some parents dilute that." His gaze settled on Harper, his smile patronizing, his eyes cold as steel. "Take this lady in the back. She's clearly out of her depth. Policy isn't for hobbyists who scribble notes like schoolgirls." The room erupted in laughter, Kendall's Hermes bag gleaming as she nodded in agreement, her lips curling into a smirk. "We need contributors, not spectators," Carver added, his tone dismissive, his words a public lecture meant to bury Harper's credibility. Harper's notebook remained open, her pen steady, her hazel eyes unyielding, but the board member's attack was a deliberate shaming, framing her as an incompetent outsider, unfit for their world. A father muttered loud enough for all to hear, "She's probably never even been to a boardroom." The chuckles grew, each word a brick in the wall of her isolation, the room's amusement a suffocating weight. Harper's khaki pants felt heavier under their scrutiny, but her silence was a fortress. The silver ring on her finger, a quiet rebellion against their judgment, a symbol of a strength they couldn't fathom. The parents' attacks grew bolder, their voices a cacophony of classism that filled the auditorium with a toxic hum. A hedge fund manager, Paul Grayson, leaned back in his chair, his voice loud and brash, his cufflinks glinting as he gestured. "I heard some kids get free lunches. Can we at least keep them out of the main cafeteria?" he said, glancing at Harper with a sneer. It's distracting for our children having to see that. The room nodded their agreement, a wave that crashed over Harper's stillness. Another mother, Sophia Reed, her Louboutin heels clicking as she stood, added, her voice sharp as a blade. We need a dress code for parents too. It's embarrassing when someone shows up looking like they just left a farm. The laughter was a storm now. Harper's khaki pants and denim shirt. The eye of their contempt, their eyes dissecting her as if she were a specimen under glass. She kept writing her notebook, filling with their words, her silence a shield against their venom, her hazel eyes steady as they catalogued each slight. Kendall, emboldened by the room's approval, leaned toward Vanessa, her voice loud enough for all to hear. Her son's in my daughter's class, she said, her tone dripping with disdain. He brings sandwiches in plastic bags. It's like he's from another planet. The room's amusement was a living thing feeding on Harper's stillness, their superiority unchallenged as they dismantled her presence, their laughter a chorus that echoed off the marble walls. As the meeting progressed, a group of parents near Harper whispered loudly, their voices carrying across the auditorium like a venomous breeze. I heard her sons on a partial scholarship. One, Mother Elise Porter, said, her diamond bracelet flashing as she gestured. No wonder he's so plain, she probably can't afford a decent tutor. Another, a real estate tycoon named Gregory Wells, smirked, his voice low but cutting. What does she even do all day? Knit. The group laughed, their eyes dissecting Harper's canvas tote, their amusement a public dissection of her life. I bet she's never worked a real job, Elise added, her tone vicious, her words a probe into Harper's supposed failures. Her poor kid stuck with a mother like that. The gossip was a deliberate attack. Each word implying Ethan's isolation was Harper's fault, a stain on her motherhood. Harper's pen moved, her hazel eyes steady, but the personal nature of their assault stung a wound deeper than their earlier jabs about her clothes. The room's laughter grew, the parents' whispers, a chorus of contempt that reverberated through the auditorium. Her silence held a fortress against their cruelty, but the invasive gossip was a new low, a violation that cut to the core of her identity as a mother. As the parents discussed extracurricular funding, the PTA volunteer coordinator, Mrs. Hargrove, stood, her voice dripping with disdain, her pearls gleaming under the chandelier. We rely on parental involvement, but some people just don't bother, she said, her eyes fixed on Harper with a sneer. I've never seen her at a single bake sale or gala. It's like she thinks showing up here is enough. The room chuckled, Vanessa's Chanel suit rustling as she nodded in agreement, her half-smile sharp as a blade. Maybe she's too busy washing dishes. Mrs. Hargrove added, her smile cruel, her words a public rebuke meant to paint Harper as lazy and uninvolved. Harper's notebook lay open, her pen steady, her hazel eyes unyielding. But the coordinator's remark was a deliberate shaming, framing her as a negligent mother who embarrassed her son. A father whispered loud enough for all to hear, her kids probably ashamed of her. The laughter was relentless, each word a nail in Harper's coffin. The room's amusement, a suffocating weight. Harper's silver ring caught the light, a quiet defiance against their judgment. But the coordinator's scorn was a calculated attempt to erase her worth before the elite. Her silence was her strength, but the attack burned a reminder of her perceived worthlessness that seared the audience's hearts. A Wellington Grove alumna, now a parent. Mrs. Vanderbilt spoke during a debate on legacy admissions, her voice loud and cutting, her posture rigid with ancestral pride. This school was built on tradition, but some parents don't respect that, she said, glaring at Harper with undisguised contempt. They waltz in thinking they belong when their families have no history here. It's an insult to our heritage. The parents nodded, their laughter sharp and eager, their eyes locking onto Harper's canvas tote and denim shirt. She's probably from some backwater town. Mrs. Vanderbilt continued, her tone venomous, her words a public erasure of Harper's legitimacy. No wonder her son doesn't fit in. He's got no pedigree. Harper's pen moved, her hazel eyes steady, but the alumna's attack was a deep cut meant to alienate her completely by dismissing her as an interloper with no lineage. A mother muttered loud enough for all to hear. She's dragging the school down. The room's scorn was a wave crashing over Harper, each word a brick in the wall of her isolation. Her silence held a fortress against their cruelty. But the historical jab was a wound that cut to her core, a reminder of her outsider status that fueled the audience's rage. The principal, Dr. Evelyn Morrow stood, her navy blazer crisp, her expression a careful mask, her eyes flickering with a hint of unease. "Before we proceed, I have an announcement," she said, her voice cutting through the chatter like a blade through silk. "The State Education Council has sent a representative to evaluate Wellington Grove's eligibility for state funding over the next 5 years. They're here observing quietly with full authority to decide our future." The parents straightened their eyes, scanning the room for someone in a power suit clutching a leather briefcase, their postures shifting to impress the invisible judge. Kendall adjusted her Hermes bag, her gaze darting nervously. Richard smoothed his tie, his smirk fading, his Rolex suddenly feeling heavy. Vanessa whispered to Lila, her voice low but urgent. "It's probably that consultant in the front row." The room buzzed with speculation, each parent posturing, their voices hushed but frantic. Their wealth and status, a shield they hoped would impress. Dr. Morrow's smile was faint, her eyes settling on the back of the room, a glint of something respect, perhaps flickering in her gaze. "Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Harper Ellis is the chairwoman of the Massachusetts State Education Council. She's been with us from the beginning and she hasn't missed a single word." The chandelier's light seemed to flicker, the room's oxygen vanishing as 36 heads turned to Harper, their faces a gallery of shock, fear, and dawning regret. Kendall's face drained of color, her Hermes bag slipping slightly, its $50,000 price tag now. A mocking weight, Richard's Rolex hand froze, mid-gesture, his car dealership empire suddenly insignificant. Vanessa's half-smile vanished, her Chanel suit stifling her earlier words about real contributions echoing in her mind. Harper closed her notebook with a soft snap, her movement slow, deliberate, and stood her 5'6" frame, commanding the room. Her denim shirt was no longer faded. It was a statement. Her khaki pants, a badge of defiance, her canvas shoes, a silent rebellion against their excess. "I didn't just come here as an observer," she said, her voice soft but laced with steel, each word a pebble that started an avalanche. "I came as a mother, the kind of mother who sat in the corner watching her son be called trash for not bringing luxury to class." The room was a tomb. Every breath held the parents' wealth and status crumbling under her gaze. "I heard everything I saw, every look, and I didn't take notes to respond. I took notes to take action." Her hazel eyes swept the room, pinning each parent in turn, a judge delivering a verdict. Lila clutched her Prada sunglasses, her tech heiress confidence crumbling like sand. James Thornton stared at his hands, his grocery list quip a noose tightening around his neck. Harper's silence had been a trap and they'd walked into it, their words recorded in her notebook, their fates sealed by her pen. The parents shifted uncomfortably, their wealth a flimsy shield against Harper's unrelenting gaze. Kendall tried to speak, her voice faltering, her Hermes bag a useless prop. "Ms. Ellis, we didn't mean—" Harper raised a hand, silencing her with the ease of someone who'd faced worse and prevailed. "You meant every word she said," her tone calm but unyielding, her hazel eyes a storm held in check. "You spoke of standards and culture, but what I saw was exclusion, cruelty, and a school failing its students like my son, who's been bullied for his lunchbox, his clothes, his very existence." She reached into her canvas tote, pulling out a single sheet of paper, a formal proposal, its edges crisp, its text, a death knell for their empire. "This is my motion," she said, placing it on the table with a deliberate calm that made the room flinch. "First, the vice principal for admissions will be dismissed immediately for fostering class-based discrimination. Second, the entire PTA board will resign within 7 days. Third, Wellington Grove will create 30 new blind review scholarships judged solely on merit, or lose all state funding. Finally, Dr. Morrow will be replaced within 90 days, or this school will lose its license to operate." The room gasped, the proposal a guillotine poised above their gilded world, its blade sharpened by Harper's authority. Her voice never rose, but each word was a hammer shattering their illusions of control, her silver ring glinting like a beacon of her triumph. As Harper placed her proposal on the table, she opened her notebook, revealing pages filled with meticulous notes, each line a record of their cruelty. "Every word you spoke is here," she said, her voice soft but unyielding, her hazel eyes a judge's gavel. "Ms. Langley's claim that I can't help with homework, Mr. Carver's dismissal of me as a hobbyist, Mrs. Hargrove's accusation of laziness. I documented it all, not to argue but to prove your culture of exclusion. The parents gasped, their faces paling, as Harper's evidence exposed their sins, her notebook, a courtroom exhibit that stripped them bare. Kendall's Hermes bag seemed to shrink. Her earlier words about community standards, now a liability she couldn't escape. Ms. Langley's professional veneer crumbled her earlier scorn, a stain on her career. Harper's silver ring gleamed, a symbol of her triumph, as her notebook became a weapon validating her authority as chairwoman. The audience felt a surge of satisfaction knowing Harper's silence had been a calculated strategy. Her evidence a blade that dismantled the elite's arrogance. Each note a testament to their downfall. Dr. Morrow's face paled, her navy blazer sagging as her authority crumbled her earlier composure, a distant memory. Kendall's Hermes bag seemed to mock her now, its price irrelevant in the face of Harper's power. Richard's car dealership empire felt small, his Rolex a trinket that couldn't buy him out of this reckoning. Vanessa's Chanel suit couldn't hide her trembling hands, her half-smile a ghost of her earlier arrogance. Lila's Prada sunglasses slipped to the table, forgotten her tech fortune. Powerless, James Thornton's bespoke suit was a costume, his laughter a ghost, haunting his silence. The parents who'd mocked Harper's tote her clothes. Her son sat in stunned silence, their legacies threatened by the woman they'd dismissed as a housewife. Harper's proposal wasn't a suggestion, it was a verdict backed by the state's authority and her own unyielding resolve. She'd heard their whispers about Ethan's Ziploc bags, his secondhand backpack, his isolation at recess where he read alone while others played. She'd seen the teacher's indifference, the administration's complicity, the board's tacit approval of a culture that prized wealth over worth. Her notebook held it all, every slight, every sneer, every proof of their failure, a ledger of sins that would reshape Wellington Grove. Harper turned to Mr. Carver, her gaze unrelenting, her voice a blade that cut through the room's silence. "You called me a spectator, unfit for policy," she said, her tone steady but fierce. "But as chairwoman, I've overseen reforms across 50 schools, while you've protected a system that bullies children like my son." Carver's tailored suit couldn't hide his flushed face, his earlier lecture. Now a public humiliation, his silver hair no longer a mark of wisdom but of obsolescence. "Your board seat ends tonight." Harper continued, her words final, a judge's gavel striking. "Wellington Grove deserves leaders who value merit, not wealth." The room murmured, the parents' loyalty shifting as Carver's authority dissolved, his power stripped away in moments. Kendall and Vanessa shrank in their seats, their own words echoing in the rebuke, their faces pale as they realized their own vulnerability. Harper's proposal gained weight, her power undeniable, her canvas tote, a symbol of her triumph. The audience reveled in the Justice Carver's downfall, a poetic reversal, his arrogance dismantled by the woman he'd mocked. A victory that resonated with every slight they'd endured. The parents' shock gave way to desperation, their voices rising in a chaotic murmur, their wealth and status no match for Harper's authority. Claire Dutton, the Gucci-dressed mother, stood, her voice shaky, her earlier thrift store jab, a weight she couldn't shed. "Ms. Ellis?" "Surely we can discuss this," she said, her hands trembling. "Wellington has traditions." Harper's eyes locked onto hers, cutting her off with a gaze that burned like a spotlight. "Your traditions breed cruelty," she said, her voice low but unyielding. "My son has been bullied for not fitting your mold and you've enabled it. That ends now." The room's silence was deafening. Claire's plea ignored her Gucci dress, a relic of her arrogance. Paul Grayson, the hedge fund manager, tried next, his voice desperate, his cufflinks dull under the chandelier. "We didn't know who you were," he said, his earlier cafeteria comment. A noose. "We'll make changes, we promise." Harper's smile was faint, almost pitying her hazel eyes, a mirror to their shame. "You didn't need to know who I was to treat me or my son with respect," she said, her words a scalpel exposing their hypocrisy. "You chose otherwise." Her words were a mirror, forcing the parents to face their own ugliness, their wealth a flimsy shield against her verdict. The scholarship fund they debated was now a lifeline they couldn't control, its future tied to Harper's demands. Her canvas tote, a symbol of her power, its simplicity a rebuke to their excess. Ms. Langley stood, her voice trembling, her earlier confidence gone, her eyes avoiding Harper's piercing gaze. Ms. Ellis? I was wrong, she said, her words barely audible, a public surrender that echoed through the auditorium. I shouldn't have questioned your ability to parent Ethan. He's exceptional. The crowd watched the teacher's apology. A capitulation. Her professional status diminished her earlier scorn, a stain she couldn't erase. Harper's hazel eyes met hers, but she didn't speak her silence, a judgment more powerful than words, a verdict that needed no elaboration. Please don't let this affect the school, Ms. Langley added, her voice breaking, her hands clasped in a plea. Harper's silver ring caught the light, a reminder of her authority, her composure unshaken. Your words affected my son, she said softly, her tone a quiet thunder. That's what matters. The room's hierarchy shifted, the teacher's regret a testament to Harper's triumph, a moment of justice that left another mocker humbled. The audience's heart swelled the apology, a direct consequence of Harper's revealed power, a victory that resonated with every parent who'd ever been dismissed. The room's elite scrambled, their wealth and status no match for Harper's unrelenting authority. Sophia. Reed, the Louboutin-wearing mother, clutched her purse, her earlier dress code. Comment, now a wound she couldn't close. We can fund the scholarships, she said, her voice trembling, her heels no longer a symbol of power, but of instability. Just give us time. Harper's gaze was unrelenting, her hazel eyes a storm that brooked no compromise. You had time, she said, her voice steady. You spent it mocking a child's lunchbox, my clothes, my presents. Time's up. The parents' faces were a gallery of shame, their earlier laughter a ghost haunting the room, their wealth powerless against her verdict. Dr. Morrow tried to intervene, her voice strained, her navy blazer sagging as her authority crumbled. Ms. Ellis, let's negotiate a timeline, she said. But Harper was already moving toward the exit, her canvas shoes silent on the polished marble floor, each step a declaration of her power. The parents watched, their eyes wide with panic, their empire of privilege teetering on the edge of collapse. Kendall's Hermes bag sat untouched, her words about community standards, a noose tightening around her neck. Richard's smirk was gone, his car dealerships powerless against Harper's authority. Vanessa's half-smile had morphed into a grimace, her Chanel suit a relic of her arrogance. Lila's Prada sunglasses lay abandoned, her tech fortune irrelevant. James Thornton's bespoke suit couldn't hide his flushed cheeks, his grocery list joke a wound he couldn't close. Harper's motion was a seismic shift, its implications rippling beyond the auditorium, a tidal wave that would reshape Wellington Grove's future. The vice principal for admissions, a gatekeeper who'd favored wealth over merit, would be gone by morning, his office emptied, his legacy erased. The PTA board, a clique of Kendall's allies, would dissolve their influence, extinguished like a candle in a storm. The 30 blind review scholarships would open the school's doors to students like Ethan, judged for their minds, their potential, their hearts, not their parents' bank accounts or their lunchboxes' brands. And Dr. Morrow, whose complicity had allowed the culture of exclusion to thrive, faced a countdown to her exit, her 90 days a ticking clock that echoed through the room. Harper's authority as chairwoman of the State Education Council was no mere title. It was a sledgehammer wielded with precision, forged in years of navigating power structures they couldn't imagine. She'd sat in the back absorbing their cruelty, not because she was weak, but because she was collecting evidence. Her notebook, a ledger of their sins, each entry, a nail in their empire's coffin. The parents who'd built their identities on wealth and exclusion were now scrambling their legacies, rewritten by the woman they'd underestimated, their children's futures, subject to a process they couldn't buy. The parents' desperation turned to pleading, their voices, a cacophony of excuses that filled the auditorium with a frantic hum. A father in the back. Thomas Kane stood, his voice hoarse, his earlier silence now a liability. Ms. Ellis, we're sorry, he said, his eyes pleading. We didn't know your son was like that. Harper paused, her hand on the door, her hazel eyes narrowing, a storm gathering in their depths. Like what she said, her voice low but cutting each word a blade that exposed his cowardice. Brilliant, kind, worthy of respect. The room fell silent. Thomas's apology crumbling under her gaze, his words exposed as hollow. Another mother, Emily. Harper, no relation, tried next, her voice trembling, her earlier agreement with the mockers now await. "We'll do better," she said, her hands clasped. "Please don't punish the school." Harper's gaze was a blade, her silver ring catching the light. "I'm not punishing the school," she said, her voice steady. "I'm saving it from you." The parents' faces were ashen, their wealth and status no match for her resolve, their empire of privilege shattered by her verdict. The chandelier's light was harsh now, illuminating their shame, exposing their ugliness to the empty room. Harper addressed Mrs. Vanderbilt, her voice steady, her hazel eyes a judge's gavel. "You spoke of tradition, claiming my family has no place here," she said, her tone fierce but controlled. "But Wellington Grove's true legacy is education, not elitism. Your influence ends with this meeting." Mrs. Vanderbilt's face crumpled, her alumna status, now a liability. Her earlier jab about Harper's lineage, a footnote in the school's new chapter. "The new scholarships will honor students like Ethan. Not your pedigree." Harper continued her proposal, a beacon of change that lit the room. The parents' murmurs grew, their loyalty shifting, as the alumna's power dissolved her historical claim, erased by Harper's vision. Kendall and Richard sat frozen, their own legacies threatened, their faces pale as they realized their vulnerability. Harper's authority as chairwoman rewrote the school's future, her canvas tote, a symbol of her power, its simplicity, a rebuke to their excess. The audience felt a thrill, the alumna's downfall, a testament to Harper's transformative influence, a lasting victory over the traditions that had justified their cruelty. The PTA president, Mrs. Hargrove, rose, her earlier snide remark about Harper's lack of involvement haunting her pearls dull under the chandelier. "On behalf of the board, we accept your terms," she said, her voice barely audible, a public capitulation that echoed through the auditorium. "We'll resign by week's end and support the scholarships." The crowd watched the PTA's surrender, a formal acknowledgement of defeat, their power erased in moments. Harper nodded, her silver ring gleaming, but her silence spoke louder than words, a judgment that needed no elaboration. "Your resignation isn't enough," she said, her voice steady. "Ensure the new board prioritizes inclusion, or I'll personally review your replacements." The parents gasped. The PTA's collapse, a final blow to their empire, their influence extinguished. Kendall's Hermes bag was irrelevant. Her allies defeated her. Earlier words, a noose she couldn't escape. The audience felt a final surge of triumph. The PTA's downfall, a direct result of Harper's authority ensuring the mockers' institutional power was gone, a victory that resonated with every slight they'd endured. As Harper reached the door, she turned to Kendall, her voice quiet but piercing, each word a thunderclap in the silent room. "You said, I don't pay tuition for my child to sit next to someone beneath us," she said, her hazel eyes a judgment that burned through Kendall's defenses. "Good. Because starting tomorrow, your child will have to reapply, along with 300 other families." This time, no skipping the line. The words landed like a guillotine, Kendall's face crumpling, her Hermes bag, a useless prop, its $50,000 price tag a mocking reminder of her fall. The room held its breath. The parents frozen in their seats, their wealth and status stripped away, their children's futures now subject to the blind review process Harper had mandated. Harper's gaze swept the room one last time, her hazel eyes a verdict they couldn't escape, a lighthouse illuminating their shame. She stepped through the door, the click of its closing a final note in her symphony of justice, the sound echoing through the auditorium like a gavel's strike. The parents sat in silence, their empire of privilege shattered, their legacies rewritten by the woman they'd dismissed as a nobody. The meeting was over, but its echoes would reshape Wellington Grove for years to come. Harper's motion would force out those who'd fostered division, opening the school's doors to students like Ethan judged for their potential, their brilliance, their hearts, not their parents' wealth or their lunchboxes' brands. Kendall, Richard, Vanessa, Lila, James, and their allies would face the consequences of their words. Their children's places at the school no longer guaranteed their applications, subject to a process they couldn't buy or bully. The PTA board would dissolve its members' names, fading from the school's history, their influence erased. The vice principal for admissions, a gatekeeper who'd prioritized wealth over worth, would be gone by morning. His office emptied, his legacy, a cautionary tale. And Dr. Morrow, whose complicity had allowed the culture of exclusion to thrive, faced a 90-day countdown to her exit, her authority a memory. Harper's canvas tote, her denim shirt, her quiet presence had been a mask for a power they couldn't fathom, a strength forged in years of navigating power structures, of protecting her son from a world that judged him for his simplicity. She'd walked into their world, absorbed their cruelty, and turned it into a reckoning. Her notebook, a ledger of their sins, her authority, a tidal wave that swept their empire away. Wellington Grove would survive, but it would be Harper's vision, a school where Ethan and others like him could thrive, where merit trumped money, that defined its future. The elite who'd mocked her son's Ziploc bag, who'd called her a bored housewife, were now the ones scrambling their legacies, rewritten by the woman they'd ignored. Like, what just happened? Then, like, share, drop a comment for every time someone underestimated a quiet woman, and subscribe for more stories where silence hits harder than shouting.